So, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It's February 10th, it's post-Oscar, and I held this podcast for obvious reasons because there was a good indication that one of the key actors in this movie I'm talking about was going to win an Oscar last night, and he did. Brad Pitt won Best Supporting for Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, which is kind of a semi-fictional look at Hollywood of the late 60s and all the different machinations of the industry and stuff like that, directed by Tarantino and co-starring DiCaprio. But we have to look at why Brad Pitt in 2020 remains probably one of the biggest movie stars out there, and it wasn't easy for him. Like, he had a lot of early roles on TV and really B-grade movies that weren't going any place. But by the mid-1990s, because of Thelma and Louise, because of one of my personal favorites, because I covered him in Legends of the Fall, because a New Brunswick actor, my friend Paul Desmond, was one of his co-stars. I covered Brad Pitt in that movie from the 93 to the later release. But by 1995, there was rumors going around that probably one of his best performances was in the can and may lead to an Oscar nomination for Best Actor or maybe Best Supporting. But it never panned out, and I still wonder why 25 years later, because it's the 25th anniversary of Se7en, that Brad Pitt nor Morgan Freeman were nominated for Oscars where they should have deserved it. Maybe the darkness of the movie, maybe the fact that David Fincher wasn't as respected then as he is now. Now, Se7en, which actually the title card gives it away. The letter 7 is stylized within the word 7. It's again a crime thriller and really what they call a body horror film noir, which is directed by Fincher and written by Andrew Kevin Walker. Brad Pitt and Morgan Freeman were the main characters in the movie, and he played an older cop and a young up-and-coming police officer, investigative officer, that have to solve the riddle of a serial killer who's using the inspiration of the Catholic aspect of the 7 deadly sins to create mayhem in the universe of 7. Now, David Mills, again played by Brad Pitt, is a detective who partners with retiring William Somerset to track down again the serial killer, who basically at the first you don't know he's using the 7 deadly sins as inspiration or as degradation, who's like to say it, and you know, bad things really happen quickly in this movie. Now, principal photography was in Los Angeles, and the infamous last scene was in a desert area near Lancaster, California. Budget for the movie was quite middle of the road, $33 million. Some special effects, but Freeman and Pitt at the time, not hard to believe in 2020, they were cost-efficient actors. The Brad Pitt would demand probably now 20 million, 15 million. Freeman the same way. But it was a big hit to the box office. Now, that infamous mid-1990s conglomerate New Line Cinema released it. It was the 7th highest grossing film of the year, with 327 million worldwide. Well received by critics, who praised the film's many film noir elements. Now, it was nominated for Best Film Editing at the Academy Awards, and well justified, because of the infamous opening credits and the closing credits, because of the stylized use of kind of explaining the mind of John Doe, the name of the murderer. We never find out his real name. And I don't want to give away who's playing John Doe, because that's a big part of the movie. And in 2020, you're going to see, for obvious reasons, I don't want to mention John Doe because of his personal life and decisions. Now, the movie ebbs and flows because Somerset, there's something going on. He's quitting, but he doesn't really want to quit. He's being forced out. And when Mills shows up, a very short-tempered guy, very egotistical, believes that he has the best way of finding out crimes. And he's moved to the city with his wife Tracy, played by Gwyneth Paltrow, which was a paramour of Brad Pitt, I think at the time or a little bit after. Now, Tracy and David have that kind of aspect. You would see millennials now, like I said, very cerebral, very loving. They have a bunch of dogs. they've rented an apartment that's near a subway, and it's kind of a running joke in there. Now, when Somerset and Mills started investigating the seven deadly sins, it starts off very uniquely. A very fat man is found bound and murdered in his own home, and it seems he was forced to eat food with a gun to his head. Either he would be murdered or he would have to eat the food, and it seems kind of bizarre. And by the time the time the second murder occurs, where attorney is being killed after being forced to cut a pound of flesh for himself, clues at the murder scenes lead them to the inclination that there's really something going on. It's very dramatic how it works, because if you know the seven deadly sins, most serial killers are not directly motivated by the seven deadly sins, but the seven deadly sins will lead to murder because of greed, of gluttony, because of different aspects like envy. The seven deadly sins, to think about the impact of recognizing these as total sins against God, is the inspiration for what John Doe does. But as it goes along, John Doe, the very famous line, John Doe to the two investigators, doesn't seem to have the upper hand. But by the end, we know he has the upper hand. But the way the murders, the sins are played out, there's like it's a movie within a movie within a movie. Now, the critics wonder why was not Freeman or Brad Pitt considered for Academy Award, Golden Globes, BAFTAs, or whatever. I think because of the body horror that was presented. The fact is, maybe they didn't take Brad Pitt very seriously as a dramatic actor, saw him as a himbo, as a beautiful man. Morgan Freeman had already been nominated for an Oscar, but it was very rare to have a big screen movie to include an older black actor and a younger white actor, because it was the other way around before. It'd be an older white actor, established actor, and a younger white actor. But this was thrown in his head. This was one of the first movies where color of the characters never really applied, because there's many major white and black actors in this movie. The coroner is black. It seemed almost like a distant cousin to in the Heat of the Night, but without the the Deep South, the machinations of prejudice and all that. At no time are the Mills and Somerset characters not considered equals, because sometimes the older police officer helps the younger police officer, or vice versa. But there's aspects of dark comedy in this, but the pressure is never taken off. But a lot of people I know, I think I saw this, if I'm not mistaken, I could be wrong here, but the Paramount in Hamilton, great location to watch a movie like this. You have to see a movie like this on a big screen. And for a lot of people, they haven't gone back to this movie. I've watched it several times over the years. I've talked about it in my own print column for the Irvings. I've talked about it or been an advocate for Brad Pitt and Morgan Freeman for more movies like this amongst my media colleagues. But for a lot of people, you can't watch this movie more than once, especially certain scenes regarding the death of the fat man, the death of the prostitute through a very, very disgusting, metallic item. I don't want to get too much into it. See, the problem is, you're doing a review of Seven, you pretty well cannot talk about any aspects of the deadly sins, because sometimes they move back on themselves or sometimes move forward. Now, I would suspect a lot of people voted for Brad Pitt last night. Second Oscar, the previous was a producer. Not just because of Seven, but he has a great body of work. Interview with a Vampire. I talked about Legends of the Fall. Talked about he's science fiction, he's action, his Moneyball, stuff like that. Morgan Freeman will later win an Oscar. I think it was, that was in mind. And don't forget Shawshank Redemption. It's hard to believe, but Brad Pitt's Oscar last night was almost like a lifetime achievement Oscar. That's kind of bizarre to say, because he's still a young, virile man, youngish. It's not like, the old days where, Fred Astaire got a nomination and Ewan Crowman won an award or whatever. This is not a lifetime Oscar per se, but it feels like it. So if you have a chance to see Se7en, there's an extended cut on DVD. It's quite interesting, talking about the whole plot. There was hopes for a sequel because at the end it was very open-ended, but it never planned out. Too bad about Se7en not being Tales from Se7, or like a TV series. You would like probably to see, I don't know, Will Smith in the sequel on TV or the big screen. Maybe if Steve Carell ever wanted to go straight drama again, Steve Carell can do straight drama, I think it would work. I still think there's a possibility of sequel. I know it's been 25 years. But there was also actually a graphic novel series of the movie, a 7-parter, and if you have a chance to track that down, it's an interesting take on the interpretation of the Se7en mythology. Or and what's really bizarre about this movie as well, it's pro-library, because there's a key scene where he's trying to teach Mills about the 7 deadly sins, and he goes to a very important library in California and he researches aspects of Dante's Inferno, different stuff. So I know it's bizarre to say, but this book is, this movie is a pro-literacy movie, which is, completely bizarre. But one last thing before I leave you go, I'm dedicating this podcast to a colleague of mine, the very great and very dedicated, and the great lady Jennifer Smith. Jennifer and the Brunswick Truth Movement is a part of our NB Independent Authors Association, and I put a quiz on the Authors Association earlier this week, what my connection to Oscar is. Jennifer, it's not Se7en, but again, my good friend Paul Desmond was in Legends of the Fall with Brad Pitt. I covered the lead up and the announcement in the Dalhousie News, Hamilton Tribune, Mountain Times for years. Paul was a good friend of mine, still is. Don't see him very often, but still a good colleague. And Legends of the Fall, of course, won John Toll Oscar for Best Cinematography, and the next year he won for Braveheart. So it was given a lot of hints, and I kind of led Jennifer on. I'm sorry, Jennifer, but that's my connection to Oscar. Not the Brad Pitt not winning for Se7en, not Brad Pitt winning for Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, but the fact I made $4,000 in freelance writing credits because it was covering Brad Pitt in the Oscar-winning Legends of the Fall, because Paul Desmond of Sunnyside, New Brunswick, which is part of the super village of Baldoon now. So again, Jennifer, to Jennifer and all the great entertainment fans and great writers and creators and storytellers, it's been a good Oscar week. A shout out to Parasite. I think it was well deserved. It was about time an international movie won for Best Picture. And if you've PVR'd or DVR'd the Oscars last night, please rewatch. There was a lot of good moments last night, and especially seeing Elton John, seeing Jane look well last night, talking about Sigourney Weaver and what do you call the super ladies presentations. It was good Oscars last night. But for me, the Oscar ceremony is only a dip in the pool. If you research all the Oscar winners and the non-winners, it's much more interesting. And again, Se7en, you can get it on special edition. The AMC shows a cut version, but there's aspects of the editing which it won a nomination for, kind of drives the plot, and that's what I want you to notice. It's a movie that's never been studied enough in film school, because it was taking some of the aspects of film noir. It's film noir, yes, but it's not full film noir, and we'll maybe get to another podcast talking about neo-noir, which is a totally invented phrase, but it's not. Most of these movies seem like film noir, but they're not real film noir, because there's no woman in the movie that makes the main character go wacky because of sexual attraction. We've already established that Gwyneth Paltrow was totally supportive of the Mills character, and which plays into the ending of the movie, but you'll have to see it for yourself. Okay, have a great day, and happy Valentine's week to everybody, all the lovers in the world. Say like a roll, buddy. Have a good one. Bye.